Hi, I'm Cote and welcome to week 6 of our 52-week baking challenge. We are almost halfway through our 4 weeks of cookies, and today we have a challenge from Greg. We are going to be making Thomas Keller's Better Nutter Butters from the Bouchon Bakery. Now this is, full disclosure, the first time I've ever made this recipe. So fingers crossed, right? We'll see how this one comes out. But reading through the recipe, it looks like this is gonna make a total of 12 cookies that we're gonna turn into 6 cookie sandwiches. So we'll be making a peanut butter cookie and then a peanut butter buttercream as well. So we'll be doing 2 different things tonight. But let's go ahead and get started. Our ingredients that we have are 1.5 cups of flour, 2 teaspoons of baking soda, 3/4 teaspoon of baking powder, 12 tablespoons of unsalted butter softened, 1/2 cup of packed light brown sugar, 1/3 cup of creamy peanut butter, 1.5 teaspoons of vanilla paste, 1 egg, 1 1/3 cups of old-fashioned rolled oats, and 1/4 cup of peanuts, toasted and roughly chopped. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. This is a recipe that's going to end up making 12 cookies that we're going to sandwich together. So we'll end up with 6 sandwich cookies, and they're going to be peanut cookies with a peanut butter buttercream frosting. So we're going to be doing 2 things tonight. But let's go ahead and get started. Fingers crossed, right? This will be the first time I'm ever attempting this particular recipe. So the first step on our recipe is to whisk together the dry ingredients. So I've got my 1.5 cups of flour. I'm going to add to that my baking soda, my baking powder, and we're just going to whisk these together, and then we're going to set this bowl to the side while we're getting in our other ingredients. Let's get again, we're going to be using our paddle with a spatula on the side. It's a really good one for cookie batters. Okay, so looking at this, we're going to be combining our butter. So let me get the butter out. And again, this is softened just to room temperature, as is the egg that we'll be adding in a minute. Remember, room temperature butter and room temperature egg, unless the recipe says otherwise. So we are adding in our butter, our sugar, so your peanut butter and vanilla paste, all right? So peanut butter, and we are gonna be putting in 1/3 of a cup of creamy peanut butter. Now I used Velvet creamy peanut butter. It from Michigan. I've heard it's really, really good creamy peanut butter. Both my parents are from the Midwest. I feel like I've got a few things like that in me. All right, so we've got our peanut butter out, and then our vanilla paste. Now, the recipe actually calls specifically for vanilla paste, and it even says something like Nielsen Massey. This just happens to be what I had at home. If you don't have vanilla paste and you don't plan on baking a lot with vanilla paste, you can absolutely substitute regular old vanilla for this, and it's just a 1-to-1 ratio. So this recipe calls for 1.5 teaspoons of vanilla paste. You can absolutely just put in 1.5 teaspoons of vanilla. The flavor might not be quite as dense, but it's going to be a perfectly fine substitute. So 1.5 teaspoons of vanilla paste. And it now says that we're going to be beating this, double checking my recipe, beating on medium-high speed until pale and fluffy for about 3 to 4 minutes. So let's go ahead. I'm going to turn my mixer on to a level 4. And let's get mixing. I'll see you in about 3 to 4 minutes. Okay, we're back. It's been a couple of minutes. I'll be honest, I'm surprised at how light and creamy this is already looking. So the next step is to add in our egg. Okay, egg is in. And we're just going to mix until that's combined, and then we're going to start putting in the dry ingredients, which was the flour, baking soda, and baking powder that we mixed earlier. Then we will add in our oats. I will stop the mixer, and then I will go ahead and add in the nuts. And that's just because whenever you're adding in chopped nuts, you don't usually want to have a mixer. The particles are too big to get between the paddle and your bowl, and it's not good. All right, so since I'm going to be putting in my dry ingredients, I'm going to turn this way down because if not, the flour will surely fly. All right. So again, this was our flour, baking soda, and baking powder. Now, one thing I noticed, this recipe does not call for any salt, right? Most cookie recipes have some salt in them, and the only guess that I can make is that the peanut butter and the peanuts have enough natural salt in them already that we don't need to add any extra. But that is a guess on my part. I'm hoping it wasn't an oversight on the creator of this recipe. All right, and now the oats. Now this is gonna thicken it up really quickly. Yep, okay, and I can already hear the machine starting to work in an uncomfortable way, so I'm gonna stop and do the rest of this by hand. Okay, and let's just stir it up. Definitely have a little bit of flour we need to combine. Okay, yeah, this is definitely oatmeal cookie consistency. It's pretty thick. All right, okay, and just again scraping edges. All right, and I am ready to add in my nuts. Okay. And get this combined. So I'm just bringing in my spatula. Man, this is really thick. Warning, I need biceps and triceps of steel for this. All right, the nuts are combined. Now, the very next step is going to be a 2-hour process, and that is chilling. So to chill this, I'm going to take out my cling wrap, and let's get the cling wrap laid out. And so what we're going to be doing is patting this. I'm just looking at how much cling wrap I might need. All right, and we're going to be bringing this into the refrigerator as soon as we've got it patted out for 2 hours. So that is definitely a long chilling time. And the reason is because we're going to be rolling it out with a rolling pin after it's out of the fridge. And this cookie, again, just based on how much butter is in here and how much peanut butter is in here, I have a feeling that if we don't refrigerate it, it is going to spread like nobody's business in the oven. So, right, when a recipe calls for chilling time, it's serious. It means it. Okay, and I'm just going to use my spoon from the peanut butter earlier. Okay, all right. And just again, double checking, is there anything special on here? Flatten into a disc, wrap in plastic, refrigerate until firm. Okay, so I'm gonna use the saran wrap as my friend on this one. Okay, and it is not quite enough to cover all the way down on the edge, so I'm gonna need a little bit more out. We definitely want to have a tight seal on here. Just remember, anything in your refrigerator, if you've got like fish or broccoli, those scents, the chemicals that are in your refrigerator, they will adhere themselves to the cookie dough, and you definitely do not want a slightly, broccoli-esque cookie, right? So definitely wrap this up. Make sure that no air is getting in. Yeah, this is quite soft. So got a nice disc. I'm going to put it in the fridge, let it chill for 2 hours, and then I will see you back here for rolling it out and cutting. Alrighty, see you in a little bit, or 2 hours. Bye. All right, welcome back. It has been 2 hours and my dough has come out of the refrigerator. It is definitely firm, and so I am about to roll it out. So I have a well-floured work surface, and here we go. All right, and I am going to be using a special rolling pin that actually goes in the freezer. It's a metal rolling pin. You put it in the freezer, and it's really good for rolling out pastries and cookies that need, or cookie dough that needs to stay cold. So I'm going to start rolling this out, and it is really hard, and I can see that it's cracking. So let's see, we definitely don't want that to happen. It's a little crumbly, so this is interesting for me. Again, first time making this recipe, wasn't expecting this to happen. So I'm gonna just use my hands to push it together a bit. And just, okay. I'm gonna do a couple folds here. Now I don't wanna play around with it too much on the floured work surface because that's going to end up just adding more flour to the cookie. And I don't want that. And I also don't want to overwork it with my warm hands. Although at this point they're not that warm. Okay. But it is starting to stick a bit to my work surface. So I'm just going to a little bit more. And what we're looking for is a rectangle that will end up being about 1/4 of an inch thick. And then we're gonna cut circles out of it. Oof, okay. Yep, not loving this, but we'll see. Yeah, it is pretty crumbly. Okay, let's try something else. All right, I'm gonna get a wooden rolling pin that I can flour and have that. So I'm gonna lightly flour this and sprinkle and see if I can somehow, there we go. This is getting a little better. Okay. So, all right. Now I'm rolling from the center out. And I want to do my best to kind of keep it into as much of a rectangular formation as possible, because when I go to cut out the actual cookie shapes, I want to be able to be basically as efficient as possible with the space that I have so that I don't end up with too much excess dough anywhere. All right, so let's see here. And I'm using just even pressure with both of my hands. All right, we're getting there. Okay. All right, so as it's warming up slightly, the consistency of this is getting a lot better. So if yours came out just like mine did, crumbly, just work it for maybe 30 seconds to a minute and we'll see how that goes. Okay. Now again, we need to get 12 cookie shapes out of this. And 1/4 of an inch thick is what we're looking for. Okay, so I'm going to use, now it's a scraper. I'm actually going to use it when I lift up the cookies and put them onto my parchment paper baking sheets. So it's great for that. But what I also like about this is that it has inches and centimeter measurements along the side. So you can see the inches and the centimeters. And so I can actually set it up against the edge of my dough to measure. Oops, wrong side. That's not going to do it. All right, and okay, a little bit more because that's just less than 1/2 of an inch. And we're looking for 1/4 of an inch. And I also know from just making rolled cookies in the past that I want them to be very even, or I will end up with cookies, some that are quite crispy, which this is going to end up being a more crispy cookie. But I'll end up with some that are very, very crispy and others that are not. And that's certainly not what we're looking for. All right, let's give it another measure. Okay, I think I'm good with that. So I'm going to be taking a 3 1/4 inch circle and punching in and twisting. Now this is a perfectly round, no ridges, so I can push down. Let's push down. And then twist. If you ever you're cutting cookies with one that has ridges on it, obviously do not, don't do the twist part or you'll lose the decoration that you worked so hard to get. All right. And I do not think I'm gonna get 12 with the way I've done this. So I'm gonna end up having to roll up the excess. All right, so I will be able to peel up the excess cookie dough, and then I'm gonna just lift under here Okay, and then I'm putting them, all I've done with my baking sheets is just put parchment paper on them, so there's no special treatment on there. And again, peeling up the cookie dough around the edges. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that and roll out the rest of these so that I end up with 12. And then these go, you guessed it, in the freezer this time. We really need to get these firmed up before they go in the oven. So I will see you back after I've rolled these out. So again, you're gonna want 12 circles, put them on parchment paper on a cookie sheet, and then put that into the freezer. And I will see you in 1 hour after they are truly frozen. See you then. All right, welcome back. I have to say, so far, this cookie recipe is pretty easy. I'm gonna do something that's not in the recipe, and I fingers crossed it doesn't come back to bite me. So I have what's called Swedish sugar pearls, and I'm gonna use these to decorate half of my cookies. So I'm gonna put a little bit of Swedish sugar pearls on 6 of my cookies. As you may remember from last week, I enjoy a well-decorated cookie. I think cookies should look just as good as they taste. So I, again, took these cookies out of the freezer, and I've turned my oven on to 325 degrees, and it's fully preheated. So I waited to take the cookies out of the freezer until that happened. And I'm just, again, sprinkling a few sugar pearls on top. Also, I had a thought while I was in between chilling and freezing. I wonder if I could make this exact same cookie and swap out pistachio butter and pistachios for the peanut butter and the peanuts. So I am probably going to try that, and I will let you all know how that goes. Okay, so Swedish sugar pearls, and this one's looking a little skimpy, so I'm going to put a few more. Alrighty, so I'm going to pop my 2 trays into the oven. They're going to stay in the oven for 16-17 minutes. As soon as they start getting brown around the edges, that's when it says that I should be taking them out. So I will see you back here in 16 or 17 minutes. Alright, see you soon. All right, my cookies are out of the oven and they are now cooling. They definitely spread, so I was right in my belief on that one. In fact, if I were to do these again, I would probably do the cookies at half size and get a lot more of them, but have them be a lot smaller as it is, and they're still warm, so I want to be careful. But I mean, they're huge cookies, right? But they do look really pretty, and I'm happy that I put the Swedish pearl sugar on there. I think that looks great. So the next step is that while these are cooling, we're going to start making our Italian meringue buttercream. And you're going to find that what we're about to do has a lot of similarities to what we did last week when we made macarons. So we have, let's go first step for ingredients. We are going to have 4 egg whites. And remember, separate those first, and then let the egg whites come to room temperature. If you can age them, putting in, a day or 2 in advance, fantastic. If not, it is what it is. So we've got 4 egg whites, 1 cup of regular sugar with 1/4 cup of water. We have our peanut butter. We're going to be using 3/4 cup of peanut butter, 16 tablespoons of butter at room temperature, and then just 1/4 teaspoon of salt. So let's go ahead. First step is, let me get my stand mixer over here. And the first step that we're going to do is get the egg whites whipping. And we're going to whip these until they get to a stiff peak. And I'm going to go ahead and turn on my stove at a 7.5 out of 10 with the sugar. And I've got my thermometer in there. And again, I'm waiting for a soft ball stage. So the exact same thing that we did last week. So that's at 235 degrees is when that hits. So I'm going to go ahead, get my egg whites going. And the sugar is cooking. So let's go ahead. All right, now this is going to take quite a few minutes. So remember, the trick is don't touch the sugar, don't touch the egg whites, but we're going to keep an eye on it. As soon as my egg whites hit soft peak, I'm going to turn it off and wait for my sugar to come up again to 240 degrees. They should, actually I'm going to turn this up a little bit, they should happen at the same time, but just in case, if one of them has to happen first, make it the egg whites first. You don't want your sugar to start cooling before you put it in with your egg whites. So I will see you in about 10 minutes or so. All right. ready to come off the stove, I'm going to pour it into my egg whites that are currently at a soft peak. So just as we did last time, I'm going to put the small pot at the very edge of my egg whites and just slowly let it drizzle in. And so if we don't remember, the sugar, because it's so hot, is actually cooking the egg whites. So it's going in very slowly to cook it gradually. But that is what makes it safe to eat this kind of meringue. What we kind of think of as raw, except that it's not, right? We're cooking it right now. So it's safe to consume. And again, slowly drizzling it in. So remember last week how we put in some food coloring, right, into our meringue and the sugar? This week we're keeping it no coloring because we're going to be putting in some peanut butter in a little bit. And so that's what's going to be adding in the color that we're going to be seeing inside of our buttercream. Okay, all of the sugar is in there. And the next thing for us to do is just be patient. I'm going to let this go until it cools down to room temperature. Right now it's very, very hot. And so what's going to happen again, I'm going to let it go to room temperature and stiff peak. So I'm looking for stiff peaks and cool at room temperature. And the reason the coolness matters so much is because we're about to start tossing in, once it gets cool, tossing in butter. And if this is too warm, it'll melt the butter as opposed to kind of emulsifying with the butter. So I will see you as soon as your egg whites have reached stiff peak and have cooled down. All right, I'll see you in 10 to 15 minutes or so. All right. Okay, we are back. My meringue is almost at a stiff peak and it is cooled off to room temperature. So I'm going to go ahead and start getting my butter ready. Now there's a couple ways that I can do this. I can definitely take a knife, which is what I'm going to do, and just kind of chunk off and piece in. You can just use your fingers and you can pull off. But what we're doing is we're going to be slowly adding kind of piece by piece chunks of our 16 tablespoons of butter to our meringue. So here we go. And you can see it's just going in and it's incorporating. And so that's what we're looking for, is for the butter to incorporate before we start to add the next piece. Now it's possible that it's going to start looking a little soupy, a little liquidy. If that happens, it's actually kind of normal. We're okay with it. We're going to keep going. Don't stop what you're doing if that's what happens. All right. And I'm just doing kind of tablespoon by tablespoon. No specific measurements, but about that amount of butter. It's also deflating a little bit, right? Because we're whipping out, we're putting in some heavier ingredients, which is getting some of the air out of there. So that's also normal. All right. We are almost done. I've got a couple more pieces of my first stick of butter, and then we're going to go into our second. So again, 16 tablespoons of butter. That's a lot. And that's also why it tastes so good, right? Looking really smooth and creamy, though. That is looking beautiful. Very silky. But once we've got our butter added to the buttercream, it's actually making more than we're going to need for this recipe. So what I have is I've got a measuring cup at the ready, because we're going to end up taking out about 1 1/4 to 1 1/2 cups of this to add some peanut butter to. And we're going to save the rest of it for anything else that we might want with buttercream. So if you're doing some cupcakes, you can certainly add some food coloring, or you could add some sprinkles to this. As I mentioned earlier, I think I'm going to actually test it out with pistachio butter and pistachios in the cookies and see what that turns out, how that turns out for me. So my buttercream is still going to get used in the next couple of days. You might find, and I'm sure that I will as well, that obviously keep it refrigerated, but that it might flatten down even further as it's cooling. And so if that happens before you go to use your second batch of buttercream, all you have to do is just what we're doing right now, is you'll put it back in the mixer, whip it up for 30 seconds to a minute just to bring some air back into it, some life back into it, and you'll be good to go. Really looking beautiful. I'm excited. This is a good recipe. I'm glad about this challenge. So I already have received a challenge for next week, but I'm still looking for one more cookie recipe to be challenged by. So if you've got one that you'd like to learn how to make or you'd like to try to see me do it, definitely put that in the comments for me below, and we'll see what we can do. All right, so at this point, I'm just letting it smooth out a little bit because I see a few tiny little lumps of where the butter is, and I definitely don't want that. Okay. The other thing you can be doing right now is getting at the ready is a piping bag, and I'm going to be also using a star tip in my piping bag, just for decoration purposes, nothing more than that. If you've got some tips, go ahead and pick one that you might like. If not, just cut off a hole at the end of your piping bag and you'll do pipes just like we did last week with our macaron frosting. All right, we are going to take this out. Okay. And, oh yeah, that looks silky and creamy. Look at that. That is gorgeous. Okay. This is actually one of the better buttercreams I think I've ever done. I'm so happy about this. And I'm going to set this aside for now. I'll put it in the fridge though in a little bit just to get it where it belongs. Okay. So I'm going to have a bowl, and I'm going to put my newly measured buttercream base into my bowl here. And then the next thing I'm going to do is add just a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And then I'm going to stir in the peanut butter. Okay, so I've got my salt well, 1/4 teaspoon sprinkled in. And then my 3/4 a cup of peanut butter. Okay, just getting every last bit out of here. And this is the exact same peanut butter that I used in the cookies. No reason to do anything special or have to use 2 different kinds of peanut butter, right? Okay, I'm just gonna scrape this off. Alrighty, so the next step is just kind of folding this in on itself. And folding is where you gradually and gently, or as gently as possible, because the peanut butter is certainly thick, get the two to incorporate, because that's what we're looking for, is a consistent frosting that doesn't have streaks of peanut butter and doesn't have streaks of buttercream. We want to have a peanut butter buttercream. I was wondering, because again, I've never tried a peanut butter buttercream before. I have some PB2, that powdered peanut butter. I wonder what would happen if I use that. I'm curious if any of you have ever tried that before. If you've ever used PB2 to make a buttercream. That would be, if you have, let me know. If not, I might end up testing it myself. It's always interesting when you can get a hold of different ways of incorporating flavor into your bakes, right? All right, we are getting there. There's definitely, though, still like this sort of center of peanut butter in here. Okay. And I'm just going to keep stirring. We are almost there. Almost. All right, so the other thing is make sure that your cookies are fully cooled. Mine are at this point. They've certainly been sitting on a cool counter or a cooling rack long enough for them to be fully cool. Also, at this point, if your buttercream is just a little too runny, go ahead and stick it in the refrigerator or even the freezer for a couple of minutes just to firm it right up. But I'm happy with how mine is looking. So I'm going to show you how to put in a tip to a piping bag. So I've got my piping bag, just like the one we used last week. And I have the star tip that I'm going to be using. And I'm going to stick it in here. And so I've got my tip down in the bag. Now I haven't cut the hole off, and I need to. So I'm going to cut the piece of plastic off. And there we go. So I'm squeezing it so that the tip is coming out of the plastic. The next trick to do is to push the plastic, the piping bag, into the tip itself. So I'm pushing it in, And what's happening is that now when I go to fill up my piping bag, it's not going to come splooging out the bottom, right? So that's the reason that we shove the piping bag into the tip, is just so that we don't end up with a horrible mess at this next step that we're about to do. All right, so I am now, same as last week. Remember, you put it in and then you scrape against your thumb on the shelf that you've made for yourself on the inside of the sleeve. So I'm going to, again, oh man, if you like the smell of peanut butter, my kitchen smells like peanut butter right now. It's a good smell. It's a happy smell to me. Okay. Almost got all of it. And I might just be happy with what I got. So I'm going to set that aside. Okay. So got my piping bag. And I can now pull on the tip. So you can see that I've got quite a bit of space there. And I'm just going to push, and I can use a scraper. Although in this case, the buttercream is pretty soft. I'm not needing any hard plastic to get it out of there. So I've got my piping bag ready. Okay. And the bottoms, there's 6 of them here. I'm just going to set them out and pipe these. So again, we did this last week, but the trick to piping is to keep your piping bag completely perpendicular to the ground, right? So you don't want to have it at an angle, especially when you're using decorative tips. You want to be coming in at a 90-degree angle. I'm going to start in the center, and I'm just going to swirl it around, almost like a pretty rosette. All right, and same thing, start in the center, swirl it around. Okay. And we're just going to do 6 of these. Now, I don't seem to be using a huge amount of the frosting. So that means I'm either going to have a lot left over, or I am skimping on these. And we used, like, remember how we talked about we did an Italian meringue buttercream? That tends to be a lot less sweet than the American buttercream, which is what we did last week. So don't feel like you're going to be smothering your people with sweetness on this. I'm just gonna put a little bit more in the centers of a few of these. And okay, I have a lot of buttercream left over. So that is also fun. So what I can do with this is just twist it up, wrap it, and then stick it into a Ziploc bag and put it in my refrigerator for a couple of days, and I can use it again. So the final step is putting the lids on my what was it again? Better Nutter Butters, I think is the name of these cookies. But right, Thomas Keller's recipe specifically. So, okay, yeah, I'm definitely happier with the ones where I put a little bit more frosting, kind of got the frosting all the way to the edge. It just looks nicer. And I will show you what I mean. Let me lift one up. And look at that. I am super excited with how these turned out. I cannot wait to bring them into the office tomorrow. And I hope that the person who asked for these ends up enjoying them. Because that is a lot of peanut butter. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me for week 6 of our 52-week baking challenge. I hope that you can join me next week, week 7. We're continuing our cookies, and we are going to be doing something special for Purim, one of the Jewish holidays that we have. So come on back next week, and I will see you then. In the meantime, happy baking.